Hello, and welcome to the Vicars Watch Dibley.
A podcast where three priests link our stories to those of a Reverend Geraldine Granger and other TV vicars. I'm Kate.
I'm Jenny.
And unfortunately, Ruthi's not with us today because she's looking after a poorly baby.
Oh, she is indeed. We all miss Ruthi's presence today. But we are going to, instead, deep dive into Cate's story. I've already had the privilege of sharing my vocational journey and kind of faith journey with the podcast. And this episode is going to be devoted entirely to the wonder that is Cate, as she shares with us how she came to faith, what her vocational journey has looked like, what she thinks about the resurrection of the dead, and how doubt works in her ministry in beautiful ways and ways of blessing as well. So let's deep dive into Cate's story. Here we go. Awesome sauce. So let's get into it, Cate. It's such a privilege and such a joy to be able to kind of hear more about your vocational story. So I'm going to start at the very beginning because it's a very good place to start. Tell us about where your faith journey begins. Like, how did you come to faith? Give us an overall picture.
Right, so I think my faith story actually begins before I was born. Let me elaborate.
Okay.
I was born into a multi-generational clergy family. So both my granddads were vicars, my dad was a vicar, and I was born into a very churchy family. We went to church every Sunday. We had little things we'd do as a family during the week. Not just saying grace before meals, but we would even have special prayerful, almost like agape suppers together every week as a family.
Wow.
For those of you who don't know, an agape meal is it's a non-Eucharistic sharing of a Lord's Supper is probably the best way to describe it. So not communion, not sacrament, but sharing in the community and the faith and the love and the story of Jesus's last meal with friends. And just the faith was part of my life. It was part of the rhythm of life, everything we did. My parents would teach me the routines of praying before bed. We'd pray before going on long journeys. Obviously, we'd pray before meals as well. I was brought up with the Christian values, went to Sunday school every week, knew all the Christian stories. And one of my grandmas would always send me Bible reading notes to encourage me to read my Bible as regularly as possible. And going to church, being part of the church family, it's really hard to explain if you're not a vicar's child what it's like having this whole extended family of great uncles and great aunts, of all these people who are invested in you and want to know about you and care about you. You're like a minor celebrity within the community because of who your parent is. So being the vicar's daughter and being Christian has always been a very strong sense of my identity. So some Christian families, when you're brought up, you're very sheltered from the world outside of the Christian bubble. But I was always encouraged to, within reason, be part of the world and learning and understanding. And learning was always very much encouraged in me, to the point where, like, my dad would even do like little summer schools for me over the summer.
What, on like particular topics?
Yeah, different topics. We'd have little homeworks to do over the summer and themed weeks. I had a Sound of Music week once, which I really remember, where I watched Sound of Music and I learnt about the Alps, and we made a ski lift for my Salvanian families.
Oh, that's lovely.
It sounds like I had an ideal childhood.
Yeah, totally.
Wonderful childhood. I'm the youngest of 4 as well, so very much following the herd as a child. But at the same time, I do have specific moments where I can look back and say I was functionally Christian. I was culturally Christian, but functionally agnostic. Because I remember about year 5 saying to friends, "Oh yeah, I'm Christian, but you know, some of these miracles don't really understand how they could have happened, like from a scientific point of view. Obviously in different words, because that's year 5.
I was going to say, it's so cute.
It's very advanced of me.
Amazing.
So I was functionally agnostic, I think. I didn't disbelieve, but I kind of also didn't quite fully understand. And confession time, I was also quite naughty in church sometimes. So I often joke about how I used to hide underneath the altar when my dad was doing communion and pull on his robes. That's not the worst thing I used to do. Here's the worst confession.
Okay.
At least once, I don't know how many times it happens, but I have a very clear memory of it at least once with one of my friends from church, my closest friend, Sophie. We sang to the hymns poo poo pee pee instead of the words.
We bet you were just set about laughing as well, weren't you?
Yeah.
Like it's almost the funniest thing is just saying those words rather than anyone else like hearing it or telling you off.
And singing the joke lyrics to Christmas carols when we went caroling, you know?
Yeah. You've spoken about that in a previous episode.
Yeah, I've spoken about that before. So I can't believe I never actually got punished or anything for that. But then that's also like, my parents are so brilliant in that as much as they enforced us going to church growing up, when we reached 11, kind of when we were starting to go to secondary school, we were given the choice of whether we wanted to continue going to church. And they didn't force us to believe in any way. They taught us to respect the fact that other members of our family really did believe. To a point of my mum's side of the family is a bit more conservative, perhaps you might say. And so when I was really into fantasy stories as a child, I was encouraged not to disclose that or kind of celebrate my love of these stories, in that I used to pretend to be a little witch running around in the trees at the back of our garden. And you know, I was sat down and said, you know, this, you know, other members of the family might find this really difficult. You know, we know it's make believe for you, but you know, let's just keep this on a down low.
Interesting, yeah.
So anyway, I was brought up, maybe I was more agnostic, but then things changed for me when I was just coming up to my 11th birthday. Serendipitous, really, because that's when I would have been given the choice whether or not to go to church. That was when my dad, who was a rector at the time, he got a job as an archdeacon. So we moved to Cockermouth, which is where I spent most of my childhood years, when I was 4. And then just while I was in my first year of secondary school, my dad got this new job, which would mean we'd have to move about 30 miles away, from a market town to the city, to Carlisle. And I was absolutely devastated by this, because unlike my siblings who they'd known moving before, because my sibling who's close in age is 6 years older than me, so for him he could remember our last move, and my siblings were actually really good in trying to prepare me even before we knew about the move, for the concept about we might have to move on. But I remember getting into the car, we were driving to see the new house, and I didn't know this. I thought I was being taken to McDonald's or something.
Oh man,
like a special treat. And then my parents said, "Oh, you know, basically we're moving, and we're going to see the house now." My mum says this was my dad's idea to use this particular method when we were actually going to the house in the car. She said she didn't think this was the best way to do it.
And would you endorse that it wasn't the best way to?
I was very upset.
Were you? Yeah, it was like the shock of that news.
So I was like in massive, what we'd call, with the training we've had now, I was in storm. I was so upset. Everything I knew, it felt like it was being taken away from me. And then as we were moving that summer, before I was switching schools, because I spent my last term, we moved, and I spent a whole term commuting from the city to my old school, and then we moved. And that summer we went to New Wine as a family, which we'd done a few times before, but living in the north we didn't do very often. And it was there, going for the first time I was allowed in the older kids' tent, and we were worshipping. And for the first time, it felt like I was connecting with God on a personal level.
Wow.
It felt like when I was worshipping, it was actually real. It's like, it's not that it hadn't been real before, but it was real to me.
Wow.
It meant something for me, and I received prayer ministry, and for the first time I felt I was actually able to talk to my dad about worship and say, why do some people raise their hands, what's happening here, and actually understand more and engage in those conversations I hadn't had before. And I received prayer ministry because I was really upset. I was scared about the future, and I just had a huge sense that God was with me, and I had my first prayer image from God at that point as well, where as I was being prayed for, I got an image of being on a path, and as I was walking forward, I knew I wasn't alone, and everything that was worrying and scaring me was just falling off behind me.
Oh wow,
as I continued
that's beautiful.
forward. Yeah, it's a really beautiful image that I had, and kind of from that moment, it's just been like I've been walking with God since then. So after that, I made the decision to get confirmed, and I started being involved with the Christian Union at my school, started to actually start leading a couple of sessions eventually. I got recruited to be in the worship band of a youth congregation that was being started up.
Brilliant.
In Carlisle. I started, and I got brought more and more in to an active faith and participatory faith, where I wasn't just sitting in the church feeling bored or wondering about, people are saying rejoice but they don't look happy. Those were things which I used to think about when I was in church. And then suddenly it was real, and it made sense to me in a way that it hadn't before. And my doubts were less important. I wouldn't say the doubts have ever gone away, and maybe I'll talk about that a bit later in the episode. But the conviction of faith and the strength of faith, and the sense that God is with me, has always remained since that moment.
Wow, it sounds like a really important, pivotal moment where your experience of God, it was practical. You're able to talk to your dad about, theology, faith, worship, but also experiential of God, a first time in a way that was notable to you as an older child, I suppose, still at that time, when you needed God the most as well, with, like you said, those things that were causing you fear. Tell us a little bit more about what happened with your faith life when you were at university and perhaps on gap year as well. What did you end up doing?
Yeah, okay, so the starting point of this is when I was 16-ish, maybe 15. I don't know the exact date, whatever. That's when I first started to hear the call to be ordained.
Oh, wow! That's early on.
So I can't talk about my gap year in university without talking about the huge shock it was for me at that point, at that age. I didn't want to hear it at all. I'd spent a lot of my early teenage years saying I never want to be a teacher. My mum was a teacher, and I never want to be a vicar. It was, you're laughing because you know what comes next.
Exactly.
I really struggled with this. I remember we were at my Fresh Expression youth congregation, and a bishop had come to talk to us about what he was doing, and he was saying, one part of my job is to see people who God might be calling to ministry, to be a vicar, and to walk alongside them, encourage them, and help them develop those skills. And it felt like he was speaking directly to me, and like he was looking at me, and I don't know if he actually was, but James Newcomb, if you're hearing this, you're one of my people. You're one of the reasons.
Shout out to you.
James Newcomb and Graham Knowles, who were the bishops. James Newcomb was Bishop of Penrith at the time, and he's now Bishop of Carlisle. And Graham Knowles was Bishop of Carlisle at the time. I think they saw in me very early something. But I was terrified. I didn't want to hear it. So I sort of convinced myself I wanted to be a youth worker instead. And this gap year was with the diocesan youth officer who was running our youth congregation. And he'd worked a lot with me, encouraging these skills. Paul Wheelhouse, another key person in my journey of vocation. I sort of, over my time with that youth group and as a youth worker, and particularly in that youth work year where I was working as a diocesan youth worker, a volunteer youth worker, I got all the opportunities to lead, but I was also involved in these vocations call waiting conferences we were running. And I started to see that actually being a vicar might be for me. But at that time, I was fully convinced that I wanted to be like a youth minister.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I had another one of these moments where the bishop was talking about people with vocations, and I just heard really clearly from God, yeah, you're going to be a vicar.
Wow.
Not a youth minister, you're going to be a vicar. And I had a bit of a breakdown. I just didn't want to hear it. A friend prayed with me and said, we just got a sense that God was saying, you know what? Just forget about it for now.
Wow.
Just forget about it for now. Looking back, the for now was really important, but it just did click with me, the for now. So then I went to university and I studied English language and literature, and within my first term I knew, actually my trajectory is towards becoming a priest.
Wow. Yeah. And you were ready to admit that to yourself, kind of thing, and to own it, would you say? Wow.
Yeah. And I had a conversation with my dad. I said, should I change courses? Mm-hmm. Should I change to theology? And actually my dad, in all his wisdom, said, no, stick with your academic passions for now. Yeah. Again, this is my dad really encouraging my learning and not wanting to confine me and saying, no, you love the course you're on. Do your course. Enjoy it. So I did. First year of university, I'll admit, I didn't really even go to church that much. I kind of just needed to be away for a bit. And then in my second year of university, I started to gradually delve back into church. And I remember praying, and I got another pivotal prayer image, which was from God, which was that I was a potato. I was a potato in the winter soil. And I was gradually seeking out the nutrients. And it was like I was hibernating, but actually stuff was happening, and soon I would flourish.
Wow, that's so cool. That's beautiful.
Yeah, then third year of university, I said, right, okay, I can't keep avoiding this. I contacted the vocations officer for Sheffield Diocese. I said, look, I know I'm called. I got connected with a vocations advisor who is now my spiritual director. Such a good relationship.
Wow.
And I spent a lot of time thinking about, okay, what's the path from now on? Where am I going? You know, I got more back involved with church again, and, you know, starting to get more involved with leadership. But I also felt like I still wasn't quite ready to go the full hog yet. Mm-hmm. I knew that I had to do something else, and I thought, well, I want to do a master's degree, and not in theology, and I want to teach abroad.
Oh, wow.
Again, having said I'll never be a teacher, I wanted to teach abroad.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah, so, and I wasn't sure what order I'd do those two in, but things worked really well. Again, I had one of these God moments of feeling like God was encouraging me just to keep walking, and it seemed like I was walking off a cliff, but God would, like, let me go out into the unknown, into adventure, and God would support me. So I, sheer coincidence, got linked up with someone who was looking to bring English students from England to be teachers in a church school in Hong Kong.
Oh, wow.
And I'd initially thought, I'll go somewhere where I can earn money to pay for my master's degree. So I was initially thinking of going to somewhere like Japan or South Korea, where you can earn quite a lot of money as an English teacher. But there was just something in me that when I heard I could go to a church school in Hong Kong in a less affluent area, I thought, right, yeah, I need to do this. So I did. I passed the interview, and I went. And I was living in the New Territories of Hong Kong, working at a school which was in the equivalent of, I guess, council housing. Well, that's what I was told. I was the first native English teacher they had ever had.
Wow.
So for some of the children, I was the first non-Hong Kong person they had ever met.
Wow.
And it was a baptism of fire, because I thought I was going as a teaching assistant trainee, but I was worked as a full-time teacher.
Okay, wow, that is different.
That was
change.
It was one of the hardest years of my life. I'll be honest about that. I knew I was it was like, if I'd been in England, we could have gone to an employment tribunal because I was not working to my job description. And at the end of the year, I had to fight to get a reference which actually reflected what my real responsibilities and not the ones on my job description.
Oh, wow.
And I was not in a great place mentally. I'd had all these plans to explore Hong Kong and the nearby countries while I was there. But in my free time, I was just so tired. I just couldn't. And actually I came away with quite a lot of trauma, which took me a while to process, and I used to have nightmares about having to go back.
Wow.
But with time and distance, and I did go back eventually for a placement while I was training, and I managed to process a lot of the pain I still held. And actually now I look back fondly on that time, because as much as it was difficult, I know if I could get through that I could get through anything.
Wow.
And I knew my limits, and I learned so much about myself, about other people. And actually while I was there, I made friends with this fantastic group of expat Christians from across the world, and had it was missional friendship in that they were always reaching out to people and bringing them in and showing them the love of Jesus, you know, helping people find church communities and that supportive faith. And, you know, and we would sometimes pray before going out on just like before going bowling. It was really
wow,
really lovely. And I spent some time in a free church. I spent some time in a Baptist church there, and just had huge opportunity to expand my horizons. And all the while I was still writing to my spiritual director. We decided to keep in contact by exchanging letters. And I grew and I learned Cantonese while I was out there as well. Took some evening classes. It was really fun.
Wow.
And I came back and I did my masters. And while I was doing my masters, I was going through the discernment process as well and being interviewed. And it was, so the whole of my first half of my 20s really was this fantastic experience of growth, starting in a period of barely going to church at all. I was still involved with other things which were adjacent to church, which I'm not going to get into because I could talk forever about it. But kind of barely going to church, or if I was going to church, keeping very anonymous, to ending up ready to come forward for ordination, and saying, right, the trajectory of my life is to become a vicar, to become a parish priest by the time I'm 30, and I'm confident in that and comfortable with that. But at the same time, having squeezed in so many life experiences to a point where people are always so confused when I talk about everything I've done in my life, because I think, but you're so young, how have you managed all of this? And God was really working with me, but also revealing so much about me to myself. I think because another significant part of my 20s was learning about how different my body is, in the sense of I have a genetic condition, which is hypermobility spectrum disorder. It's a connective tissue disorder, which means that my joints don't stay in place, essentially. The tissues holding my joints in place aren't as strong as other people's. I never knew this going into my 20s. My mum called it weak ankles. We said I had weak ankles because I was always twisting my ankles. It took me a while to learn to walk properly, like my feet were always turned in. And as a child, I'd had to have special appointments to kind of help me learn to walk with my feet facing forward. Sure. So it was such a weird thing. And I was always getting really tired after school, but we just thought it was normal, right? During my gap year, I subluxed my knee. And it was from that, just before starting university, that I got diagnosed with having what was then called joint hypermobility syndrome. And kind of then through my 20s, I started to realise just what that actually meant for me. And it took me years, literally the whole of my 20s, to realise things like not everyone gets as tired as I do. And actually what I have is persistent fatigue. It's not just feeling tired, it is fatigue, and that's something I need to learn to manage and live with. And actually what I think of as normal is actually low levels of pain for anyone else. And actually I am functioning with levels of pain which other people don't function with. I just don't register it as pain anymore. Or it's not normal to wake up some days and not be able to walk as well. I used to think walking to school, it's one of those days where walking is difficult. Oh dear. You know, and it never occurred to me that that wasn't something everyone deals with.
Sure.
So again, my 20s were a huge path of discovery, learning for me who I was and what was important to me, what God's purposes were for me, but also in terms of my physical condition, that actually this was something God, it wasn't a curse, it wasn't a punishment, it was who I was. And I'm actually fairly relieved that for where I came to learn about this wasn't some huge life-changing diagnosis moment, but actually a gradual realisation of my differences and how I'd always lived like this. And actually my faith in many ways is shaped and deepened by my bodily experience. And my reliance on God to get me through the day, and my understanding of needing to pace myself, and kind of a concept of Sabbath, which I've explored in further years, which is a sense of holy rest and what it means to hold restfulness and peacefulness. And so it's not something I need to be healed from, because to be healed from my genetic condition, this thing that I am, would rob me of huge elements of how my faith has been shaped.
Yeah.
I'd be completely lost, because I'd have to start from the beginning. My whole, almost not my whole relationship with God, but yeah.
That's beautiful. Did you ever have to, either helpfully or unhelpfully, come into contact with people who wanted to talk to you or pray for you, or like healing ministry that kind of targeted that aspect of you? It sounds like you've really thought a lot and heard a lot from God about that, but have you ever had to encounter healing ministry, either helpfully or unhelpfully, with this?
Yes.
Part? Okay.
Yes.
Sounds like, you've had some experiences there.
I've had helpful experiences. When it's been helpful, it's been for more specific things and for things that I've wanted. In terms of first year of university, I ended up having to use crutches because I'd moved to a very hilly city, to Sheffield, and I was doing a lot of walking, so my knees got massively messed up because it wasn't that long since I'd injured my knee, so I was on crutches for a bit, and some prayed for me for my healing for that particularly to get better, and it did. Almost pretty much after being prayed for, I stopped needing to use crutches.
Praise God, yeah.
Praise God. That was specific, and it was something I wanted to not have to use the crutches anymore, right? When it's not been consensual, and that's how I'm going to describe it, non-consensual prayer for healing, it was actually, I'm not going to give too many details because I don't blame the people for it. But I was at church and I'd not been very well, and a group of people kind of said, do you want to just take a seat? So I said, that's nice, you asked me to sit down because I've not been very well. And my joints are very good. And they all gathered round me and started praying for me, and saying, oh, God, we know this isn't your will for her, heal her of this condition. And all the time I was thinking, no, God, I know this is your will for me. God, don't take this away from me. You don't need to do this, God. Please don't listen to them.
How interesting.
So it was like I was counter praying.
Wow, what an experience.
It was, those people will never know how negative an experience for me it was. And I never really wanted to kind of say to them, actually that really isn't on. But it has, they were coming out of the goodness of their hearts and the kindness, and for them it really was a kindness and their love for me that they didn't want to see me suffering, and I am very thankful for that love. But I think there are certain principles one should follow if one is praying for someone. One of those, I think you need to ask, what do you want me to pray for specifically? What don't you want me to pray for? And do you want me to pray for you is probably one of the most important. Yeah,
thank you for that. So true.
Because it's not that I reject prayer completely. It is not that I reject prayer for healing completely for me. But for me, it's about specific things in that moment. Like, oh, actually, my back's really hurting today. Could you pray for my back to ease up? or my walking's been really bad this week and I need to be able to stand for Sunday. Please, can you pray that would sort itself out? Or I've been really fatigued this week. Please, can you pray that I can have some energy? So for me, that's more important than the whole condition going away.
Yeah.
Because again, if a whole condition went away, I literally do not know who I would be.
Yeah. Wow. That's such a powerful kind of like placement of who you are in the fullness of who God has created you to be, which I hope, I'm finding it, I hope those of you who are listening, hello to you, are finding really empowering as well. I think that's, it's amazing. And also models what Jesus did as well. When Jesus was, approaching people to offer healing ministry, he would, what do you want me to do for you? Yeah. Like what you're describing is, obviously makes sense and it's from scripture. I love that. Consensual praying is, I think, a good buzzword for us to take away.
And what Jesus did when Jesus was healing, it's really interesting to read that from a more disabled perspective. I still really struggle with the label disabled. I use it when I need to. Often kind of in terms of employment, because under the Disabilities Act I do qualify. I just don't think medically, I don't know, I struggle with a label, let's not get into that.
Sure.
But what Jesus did was Jesus approached healing in multiple dimensions. It was never just about physical healing. Jesus, and I learned this, I did a hospice placement, and they talk about healing in 4 dimensions. You have medical healing, but you also have social healing, spiritual healing, and there's a 4th one, mental health as well.
Yeah.
So for me, what I see Jesus doing is actually navigating those multiple dimensions of healing. So in the culture Jesus was in, if you were physically disabled, you were socially excluded, and you were also excluded from faith as well, from being, if you were ritually unclean, you weren't allowed to worship in the temple, and that could also, there's also mental health aspects in there as well. So what I see Jesus doing is navigating the multiple dimensions of healing and saying, right, for you to be healed, this X, Y, and Z needs to happen, so that you can live a full life. X, Y, and Z needs to be happen. In my life, I don't need to be fully physically healed in able to have spiritual fulfillment or social fulfillment or even mental health. We all have our mental health struggles, but for me, that's not reliant on suddenly having my genetic condition changed.
Yeah, really, really good. Really helpful. Thank you so much for sharing in on that and giving us a bit of a theological deep dive. I love about for those thinking of those different realms or dimensions of healing. That's so true and so powerful. Okay, so coming back to your vocational journey then. So you're in Hong Kong, you're still talking to your kind of vocational advisor, you're writing to them, you're coming home. What happens between kind of being accepted for being accepted for training for ministry? Like what happens next?
Okay, so I had my Bishop's Advisory Panel at the same time I was sitting for the final exams for my Masters. So I came back from Hong Kong, started my Masters, and I remember talking to some of my friends at the time before going into an exam, one of the final exams, saying, oh yeah, actually I'm going to go to this 3-day interview soon to be selected for ordination. So it was such a crazy time.
Wow, that's full on.
Ridiculous. Yeah. And, writing my dissertation then over that summer as I was preparing to go to theological college as well. So the two were really overlapped. So I came back, got approved by the diocese to go forward for selection, which is what I started to, that was then kind of during my master's year. That's what I was doing. Then got approved by national selection at the start of that summer, I think, and I've been to Cranmer Hall where the 3 of us trained, and decided that's where I wanted to go. And then that summer I was writing my dissertation for my master's, which was actually I decided to look at preaching and the language of preaching. It was applied linguistics was my master's, but I moved back into what I'd been doing in my undergraduate degree, which is called stylistics, which is how language is used to communicate meaning in specific contexts. So I analysed 3 different sermons from 3 different types of preachers who I knew, and I kind of was looking at, and I did some research into the history of a sermon. I was trying to describe linguistically what for contemporary sermons, what contemporary preachers were doing. Anyone wants to hear that, I'm sure I could read that. I could sure I could share that file.
Love that.
Anyway, I literally handed in my master's dissertation, and I think I moved for next week to Cranmer Hall.
That's intense, to dive into a whole new... Did you do a master's while you were training to be ordained?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
Because my master's was not in theology.
Yeah, of course.
And my undergraduate was not in theology. So it was decided that I should do, because of my age, I should train for 3 years, and I should do another undergraduate degree, which at the time I think I was frustrated because I had been told by the vocations officer at the time that I could be eligible to do a PhD.
Oh, right.
Because I was doing a master's. Some universities will say it doesn't matter what your master's is in. If you've got a master's, you've got a master's, so you can move on to the next level of higher education. So at the time I was frustrated that I was kind of going backwards in academics, and I think anyone who knew me from that first 6 months, 8 months in theological college probably would be able to observe that about me, that I kind of was really proud I'd completed my master's, and actually I got a distinction in my master's, and I'd been invited. They really actually were. When I got my letter from my master's, they said, "We know you're doing this sort of thing, but are you sure you don't want to do a PhD with us?" So that was a really interesting struggle in my first year. First year was just, I think, for a lot of us, a huge emotional upheaval. There are lots of things you have to learn about yourself. I was really confronted with how my relationship to anxiety and how I function with anxiety at certain points. It really didn't help that I had gone from such a high pressure of finishing my master's to go into theological college. There was specific context for why my mental health was the way it was at that point. But I learned a lot about myself. So I did my 3 years. I got to know you and Ruthi and a good number of other fantastic friends. When you two left after finishing 2 years, it was such a strange year. It was so strange for me to have that final year without you. I'll admit it felt like a lot of my friends were leaving. Because, I don't know, a good percentage of our friendship group were on 2 years instead of 3. But you know what? It was such an important time for me to learn more about myself. There was no way I was actually finished developing vocationally, looking back. Like, at that time, I thought, yeah, I'm ready. But looking back, I think, oh no, there was so much more that had to happen.
Yeah.
You know? And when it came to discussing curacy with the Bishop of Doncaster, he didn't know where to place me. He was like you. I don't know whether you are evangelical, whether you're Anglo-Catholic. I don't know what sort of church to place you in. And in the end, I did end up swapping curacies during my 4 years with Sheffield Diocese as well, which I think reflects that. But also because I had a major health episode kind of in the middle of my curacy, which meant I had to change curacies. As I was confronted with the model for ministry I was in my initial curacy just wasn't healthy for me. It was very energy intensive, and because I struggle with energy, that doesn't mix, so I moved somewhere else. But also got to experience my first curacy was in a really evangelical setting. My second curacy was more liberal Anglo-Catholic.
That's cool to experience both actually in that training.
Yeah, and it was really helpful for me in terms of unpicking who I actually am as a priest, and actually learning when you strip away everything and you're left thinking, can I do this job? Because I was really unwell. Like I was bedbound. I was in a huge amount of pain. So my back had just given up, and I just couldn't move, and I was on really strong painkillers. And it took me ages to recover from that. And I was thinking, maybe I can't do this job, maybe it's not right for me. But God had called me. And God had called me as I was, not as someone else. God had called me as the introvert who was in pain but also has a really weird brain and has strange passions. And God had called me to be me. And so I knew that I couldn't give up. I couldn't just say, right, well, that's it, I can't do the job. So I had to look at it and say, so what is being a priest for me? Being a priest is journeying with people. It's living the kingdom with people. And for me, that's a very gentle experience. It's not, you don't have to be high energy all the time. And it's collaborative. It's being authentic and actually saying, you know what? I have a broken body, but God has made me this way and God loves me like this. And I love God despite being like this because I'm like this. Yeah. And it deepens my faith. And I know my limits, and God wants us all to thrive. And God doesn't want me to be the sort of priest who is so overworked that I never have time for people. So I learned how to inhabit my ministry as God had created for me to have. And then I had to try and find a post which fits that.
Yeah.
That was a really difficult year. During the pandemic, we were in lockdown and I was job searching. And it was really difficult to find something where I felt like I could be me. And actually, but I ended up in just a perfect place for me. It really is a perfect place.
So just remind us that you were ordained in what year and where?
Yeah, so I was ordained in Sheffield in 2017.
Fantastic. And then ordained priest the following year?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
And actually, that's the year my dad retired.
So you're like continuing the legacy of kind of ministry in your family, which you spoke about at the beginning. Fantastic. So you had those two examples and that kind of two different experiences of curacy. And then your first post you spoke about, you found finding it during the pandemic. Whereabouts in the world are you now? And why don't you share with us as we kind of come into land, what is your vocational journey? You spoke about it, how it's continuing to unfold. And I love that. I think it's so true. Where are you now? How are things now? And, well, I've got another question for you, but I'll let you answer those two first.
Okay, so, again, another weird God coincidence. My curacy ended. The Sunday my curacy ended. That week, I came for interview here.
Oh, wow.
And I got this job. Talk about God's timing, right?
That's really cool. Yeah.
If you looked at it with a doubtful eye, you might say that was desperation, but who knows? So I am in Hereford Diocese, so I'm on the border with Wales, basically, near enough. Which is fantastic. I grew up on the border of Scotland, now I'm living on the border of Wales. So when people ask me, oh, is it not really far, from what you grew up with? Especially if you moved from Sheffield to Hereford, or you grew up in Cumbria and now you're in Hereford. And I say, it's borderlands. I grew up on the borderlands. And it's so strange because I initially didn't think I wanted to go to a rural place, having grown up. I knew eventually, having grown up in Cumbria, I had in my head, eventually I want to go to rural ministry, but not while I'm young, not while I'm in my 20s and 30s, because I thought I would be too isolated. So I've been living in cities since I was in university, right? I came here and I just knew, oh no, this is right. I love it. I love the villages. I love, life moves at a different speed in rural ministry compared to urban ministry. And I love that there is a sense of time and things don't need to be rushed. And people have really just cared about me as I've come in. I think they're really excited that they've got a young minister, because not many young ministers, particularly young women, are attracted to the more rural jobs. But I love it. Every day when I'm walking my dog, I look around and I think I'm so lucky to be here. It's so wonderful through every season. I love just the size of the communities, where if I'm known, I can walk around and people know me and people trust me. I'm walking around and one of the school kids who's walking home shouts, hello Reverend Cate. And then you hear them say, I just saw Reverend Cate to her friends.
That's really sweet.
And it's just, you know, it's lovely. I've got 5 churches, which I never thought I would want. And quite frankly speaking, I'm likely, if I stick around in this position, I'll end up with more in the next 5 years. But I love each and every one of them. And initially I was thinking, how am I going to keep track of all these different churches? I'll never feel like I'm in any place. But you know what? Every church is so different in its own way that you do get to know them. And even if there's 2 of my churches I'm only in every other month for a Sunday service. But I still feel like I know them.
Yeah, that's lovely.
And it's a difficult job, let's be honest. There are lows. I've been painting this lovely pastoral picture, kind of almost Vicar of Dibley. Oh, I love village life. But it is difficult. It's hard when you're being pulled in 5 different directions. Generally speaking, at least one church will have some big problem at any time. But at the same time, you can always look to the other churches if you need an escape. Yeah, and there's always difficult personalities, but I really benefit from having my deanery team. We're working as a team ministry, so I have more experienced colleagues who I can rely on and talk to. We have a deanery curate, so I have someone who's a little bit more of a peer as well, kind of on the other side. So I can talk to her about curacy and, you know, build up a relationship with her in terms of helping with her training as well, and sharing the things I've more recently learnt. It's an interesting job. So my job title is Rural Pioneer Priest, whatever that means.
Wow. That's cool.
And there's a huge deanery element where, technically speaking, myself and the 3 other rural pioneers and our self-supporting clergy share the rural dean work, although we do have a named rural dean as well. But we are very involved with the leadership of a deanery and decision making of a deanery. And I have this project, which is this missional project, which is supposed to be, it's called Welcoming or New Communities, and it's kind of got multiple dimensions. One which is about how we welcome into our communities all the people who are moving into the new houses which are being built in our villages.
Wow, important stuff.
One is kind of then how do we increase the visibility of the church to those people, and then another is how we actually welcome those people into the church community as well. Wow. So you've kind of got these multiple dimensions which I'm still trying to unpick and work out what that means. But then at the same time I've got schools work and messy church, and my messy church is really rapidly growing in a really godly, fantastic and surprising way.
Brilliant.
But then lots of other stuff as well. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does beautifully. So just to double check then, your role, obviously it's deanery wide. How many churches roughly are there in your deanery? Because that's beyond. And then is there a team that kind of works together for your 5 churches that you spoke about as well?
Yeah. So we have a deanery. Our deanery is, I believe, I could be getting this wrong, but 35 churches.
Okay.
And we have 4 full-time stipendiary rural pioneer priests covering those churches. I have 5 parishes. It's a single benefice, and my neighbouring benefice is 5 churches, and then this sounds really bad. All the others are covered by the two other clergy.
Sure.
But the population distribution is the same, if that makes sense. So I'm in a more populated area of the benefit of a deanery. I'm working closer with my more immediate colleagues. So there's these 2 benefices which we're working towards working closer and closer together, doing things like shared youth work, messy church.
That's really cool.
Having some more shared services eventually as well. So we have a sense of, we have our areas of oversight. So we have our immediate areas of oversight. So I have my 5 parishes. Then you have your more grouped areas of oversight. So we've got this kind of more northern part of a deanery versus a more southern part of a deanery, or a more populated part of a deanery versus the more rural part of a deanery. however you would like to describe it. But then you also have a whole deanery-wide oversight. So I've started swapping some Sundays with my colleagues in other parts of the deanery. So because as much as I'm a priest of my 5, I'm actually a priest of every church in the deanery. I've been licensed to every church in the deanery. Wow. So the ultimate aim is for all of those churches to see all 4 of us.
Yeah, sure, and to be shared around.
As the vicar, you know? And we also have a curate, and we have some self-supporting ministers as well. In my 5, I have a couple of lay leaders who are emerging and being trained up. And I have a retired bishop, not my dad, a retired bishop, who lives in one of my villages and helped me take some of the services, particularly on a second Sunday where we have 2 services at the same time. Mm-hmm. And my dad occasionally does help.
That's really cool. That's handy to have, isn't it?
But he's particularly if I'm ill. And I've called up on a Saturday saying, Dad, I feel so ill.
Oh, that is helpful and handy.
He'll say,
that's
you know
brilliant.
what, I can take the service for you tomorrow if you want.
What a sweetheart.
So, yeah.
That's so cool. And I think having the title pioneer almost like releases and encourages like fresh and new things. Like it's inbuilt in your very role that you should be trying new things and like, getting involved with Messy Church, and I'm so pleased to hear how that's flourishing. That sounds really cool, really exciting. Yeah. And thank you for sharing as well, like the highs and lows of, priesthood as well, and how things are now for you. And obviously we wish you very well in your ministry. So I guess like a final question then, like, is there anything you want to add? Like how is faith stuff and how's God speaking to you now? And have you got any recommendations for those people who are maybe exploring calling in their own lives? Maybe those who have had those experiences where they thought, "Oh my goodness, like God is talking to me, but I don't want to hear it right now." How are things for you now? And have you got any recommendations for people exploring?
Yeah, so I think kind of a last thing I want to talk about, because I feel it needs to be said. I mentioned earlier how doubt has been a huge part of my journey, and then I just didn't touch on it beyond that initial explanation that I felt I was more functionally agnostic as a child. Doubt never goes away. I'm going to say that. As much as I have the firm sense of faith that God is with me, and for me that matters. I never doubt that God is with me. The things I doubt are the more kind of, it's the details sometimes, and particularly it's that scientific mind. So the big challenges for me, the things that make me go, why on earth do I believe this? There's 2 big ones. And they seem ridiculous. And they're very kind of scientific ones. So there's one which is, in the Creed, we talk about, we look to a resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come. And I think the part of the faith I find most difficult is the future resurrection, the day of resurrection, and the concept of a physical afterlife, which not every Christian believes in, but it's kind of the orthodox understanding. And for me, I find that really difficult. My brain just can't get around it. I believe that Jesus raised people from the dead. I believe that God has the power to raise people from the dead, and I believe that Jesus was raised from the dead. But I struggle with the idea of a single day of resurrection where all people are raised from the dead for judgment. It just doesn't really compute in my brain. And I need to say this because I think other people will have had the same struggle with other elements of our doctrine as well. And so for me, I had to really think about, well, how do I say this line of the creed with authenticity and with integrity? So for me, how I unpick it is saying, I look to the resurrection of the dead in that I believe that Jesus' resurrection and the resurrections that Jesus did miraculously in his ministry demonstrate that God has the power of life over death, that death is not the end, and that there is resurrection from the dead. There is life that comes after death and through death and over death. So for me, the resurrection of the dead is about more than just the physical body coming back to life. It's the spirit not being trapped in death, and that there is life and love beyond death. And I don't know exactly what that looks like. And so for me, that's a doubt. It's a mystery. And I'm happy to leave that unknown. As long as I can say with integrity that line of the creed, I think I'm solid.
Yeah.
And then the other one is a ridiculous thing. So I'm really into sci-fi. I'm really into fantasy, right? You know this about me.
Yeah.
The other thing that really sends my mind boggling and sends me into a doubt spiral is when I think about the vastness of the universe, right?
Yeah.
And I think of how big the universe is and how small Earth is comparatively and how small human life is comparatively to the whole universe. There's a line in, I think it's Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's either Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy or it's a Red Dwarf books, but it talks about how statistically humanity doesn't exist. Statistically, it actually talks about sex, and it says statistically no one is having any sex in the universe. Because
how does that figure?
Because life, compared to the kind of size of the universe, is so statistically small compared to the size of the universe.
I see. Okay.
So statistically, there's nothing
It
compared to the size
sense.
of the universe, right?
Yeah.
So that sends me down a spiral of if there's no other life in the universe, why does God care about this time? Like, why is the universe so big and like we are so small, and why are we so important? And it sends me, you can hear me starting to go into the spiral there.
It's amazing. It's awe-inspiring.
But then the other side of, because I read so much sci-fi and watch so much sci-fi, if there is life in the universe, and I'm going to say I don't know what I believe, but if there is, why Earth? Why humans? Like, why did Jesus become human? And there's people have thought about this. It's called xenotheology, and it's so ridiculous to admit that I think about this because it's so irrelevant to everyone. But you know what? If life in other planets is discovered, this is going to be a big kind of turn point for every world religion, because it completely changes the dynamics of like, what does the incarnation mean if there's life on other planets? And you know what C.S. Lewis wrote about this? C.S. Lewis has a lesser known sci-fi series in which he explores life on other planets.
Oh, really?
And C.S. Lewis's proposal is that every cognizant species, every species that has capacity for higher thought in the universe has the opportunity to fall or not, and if they fail, they have the opportunity for redemption through the word incarnate, which is a really interesting way to explore it. And another perspective might think, actually, I actually talked about this in my doctrine of verbal exam at Cranmer Hall. This is so much on my brain.
Brilliant.
Another thought is that
still on your brain even from
it's
those
still
days.
on my brain. It's always on my brain. What's important is not that God became human, but that God took on matter. That God came to live among the living. And it's something just occasionally my brain goes back to and starts reflecting on and developing. So maybe, I'll eventually write my musings down. But it's all speculative theology. It's basically sci-fi theology, which is... Yeah, but anyway, but my point is, for me, doubt is always there. And there are days when I look at the scope of the universe and I think, how can this? Why can this? But I always fall back on the fact that I choose to believe and I trust that God is with me, and for me that's what's important. Everything else can be shaken, but God is important. When I was a teenager, I read Rob Bell's Velvet Elvis, and he talks about faith being not as a brick wall, because if you have a faith which is a brick wall, if one of those bricks upon which that wall is built is knocked away, the whole wall falls down. He's talked about having faith like a trampoline, and you fall, but then you're bounced back up again. And for me, that's what's important. Is any time I have a doubt, it encourages me to interrogate and investigate my own faith. And for me, a really key feature of my faith is having the freedom to interrogate and investigate and wrestle with scripture, with tradition, with reason. To have that permission from God to say, you know what, I'm reading this part of the Bible, and I think this is an example of what we're not meant to do rather than what we are meant to do. Or, this doesn't ring true with what I've learnt about God with other parts of scripture, with tradition, with reason. Or, we've been doing this for years, but suddenly it feels like it's not right, you know? And to actually have that purpose of being able to say doubt can be holy, because doubt can lead us deeper into truth. Doubt can be the doubt spiral, as much as I've talked about it being something you want to avoid. Actually, it can be really helpful to reaching a deeper truth, because you start asking those questions. And for me, it's saying, you know what, if everything else was proved false, these are the things which are important to me. These are the actual bricks upon which my faith is founded, that God is love. And God is with me. And God is with all people. And that keeps me firm. And so when people say to me, I hear so often in ministry, I don't know about you, oh, I wish I believed like you did. I wish I had faith like you did. I just can't. I think it's so important for people to know. And if you're listening and you're discerning vocation, but you think, but I have too many doubts. No, your doubts are your strength. You know, they can lead you to deeper faith, and they are part of faith. We see it throughout scripture, throughout history, people who wrestle with their doubts, and they come to deeper understanding of God, and they reveal truths to the whole of God's people through their wrestling. So that's something I wanted to talk about.
That's so cool. Yeah. And so true as well. Thank you, for sharing that with us. And also, no doubt, I'm not sure about anyone else, but boggling our brains with some unsolved mysteries as of yet. We'll have to probe you later on your findings. I definitely think you should write your musings down, by the way.
Well, I've done ideas experiments where I've literally thought about all the different sci-fi and fantasy universes which I enjoy, and how the gospel it can be communicated or works in those settings. And maybe at some point we'll have to do an episode where I talk about how does the gospel work in Star Wars, how does the gospel work in Star Trek or Firefly, or
bringing those disciplines together,
the Diana Wynne Jones books or Terry Pratchett books or whatever. So for me, you asked me where I am currently. I'm in a place of spiritual creativity, where I feel God is with me, and I am enjoying being in the playground of tradition, of faith, of just, trying things and knowing that God is with me, as I try different things in parish, as I bumble through ministry, and, just knowing that God is with me as a constant when things are bad, when things are good, when, I'm not being as devout in routines as maybe I should be, knowing that God is with me and ready to draw me back at every possible moment. And God is always there. As I said, I have nearly every day I look around at my surroundings and I think, oh God, you're so good. You've called me here, and I'm so lucky. So yeah, when you asked me, is there any advice I have to someone who's discerning ministry, a call to ministry? If you worry that you're not some perfect Christian, and you look around you at some of the other people who are going forward for ministry, and you think, they know the Bible back to front, they have every Bible verse memorised, or they're super intelligent and I'm not, they are super skilled in leading worship, they're great musicians, or they've just got such confidence and they never doubt whatever, blah, blah, blah. No, that's not true. You're just as worthy. God has called you as you are. And what you perceive as your weaknesses could be the strengths and why God has called you to ministry. And stand firm in your sense of calling. Know that God is with you. God calls so many different types of people, and God does that for a reason. If God wanted every single person to be exactly the same, God wouldn't have created so much diversity. To bring it back to sci-fi, there's a saying in Star Trek, which Spock says, it's infinite diversity and infinite combinations. And for me, this is just this, for me, that's also a great understanding of God. There is infinite diversity and infinite combinations. God is so big and great that God has created all this diversity. What priesthood looks like for you doesn't have to look like what priesthood looks like for your vicar or your supervisor or your training incumbent or your tutors or your friends. God has called you to be you, and just be brave in that knowledge. And when people pick you out for being different, don't let them try to force you into a box. Don't let them force you into a different shape, to be a different shape, because you are you and God has called you to be you. And the best thing you can do is just say, you know what, no, I'm not going to let you tell me I look too young to be a vicar, which I've been told. I'm not going to let you tell me that I shouldn't be a vicar because I'm female, or because I'm male, because I'm gender non-conforming. I'm not going to let you tell me that I can't be a vicar because of my hairstyle, or because of my accent, or because of my level of education, or my background, or I haven't been a Christian long enough. I've heard some people have been told that before. Or I'm unmarried, or I'm married, or, you know, I've got children, or I don't have children. You know, actually, no. God has called you. Be free.
Oh, that's juicy and beautiful and true. Amazing. Cate, thank you so much for sharing with us or allowing us to get up close and personal with your kind of faith journey, your vocational journey, where you're at now, what you're thinking about, how God has spoken to you, how God has led you, kind of allowing us to look at your family, how their influence, their theology has affected you, the beautiful pictures that God's given to you, the ups and downs, like the highs and lows of your ministry, and just a kind of, a real 3D picture of who you are and where you've been. It's really been a privilege to hear you. And thank you for your ministry and every blessing as you continue to wrestle with all of these things and, continue to hopefully one day publish some bits and bobs for us to work through properly and academically. But for now, we thank you and bless you in your ministry today. So I hope, guys, that you've really enjoyed hearing a bit more about Caitlin's journey, the stuff that she's talked about, especially with vocation and ministry. I hope it's inspired you as much as it has me. Every blessing from us. Bye for now.
God bless.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Vicars Watch Dibley. Thank you to Toby for editing our ramblings.
Any views expressed in this podcast are our own and don't necessarily represent those of the Church of England or any other organisations with which we are affiliated.
And as always, bless you for listening.
So this joke is, I mentioned earlier Paul, who was my youth work boss, who was really pivotal to my journey. And this was a joke he used to tell us, and at the time it seemed to be his favourite joke. What's brown and sticky? A stick.
Is it a stick?
Yeah, it's a stick.
I love that.